Dan and Damian in the morning. Fresh. Welcome, folks. We are somewhere south of North Bay, about 20 minutes on, I think, Quasi Lake.
I thought we were originally southwest, but we're actually southeast.
Are we?
I think so.
Yeah, kind of. Just a little bit.
Yep.
If you want to get detailed about it. It is gorgeous up here, I got to tell you. I'm actually astounded how quiet it is. It's been so long since I've had this kind of quiet.
You've been living in construction noise for years now. It's really easy. My partner comments on this whenever we go up to her family cottage, but it's really easy to forget just how loud the city is until you get out of the city, and then you're like, oh right, silence. It's nice.
Well, especially even remember last night we went out on the lake in the canoe, and you were commenting on how like sound just carries across the lake, and we could on the shore that house was the woman talking about the dead body farm, which we wish we had a recording of because it's been excellent to sample. Oh, but it is so Of course, then we were making jokes about it, so I wonder if she heard us.
Like I said, I don't think they could hear us. I think we were speaking too quietly.
Yeah, we are kind of quiet. Well, we are or we're not.
We were quiet.
Some of us are not that quiet.
I need to clean my glasses.
Oh, so we were talking in our spoofs outtakes prior to this about what the theme will be for today and what we're going to be doing for the next little bit before the end of the year.
Yep.
And so today we're going to talk about, I guess, brew your own observability?
Self-hosted observability?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, and that's actually self-managed versus brew your own. Now, those are two different things altogether, so we got to be careful about that.
I would say, especially like after the conversation we had last week with Charity, if you're getting into brew your own observability, you're either a very large organization with a lot of money to spend on custom solutions and a very particular set of problems, or you're making a mistake. One of the two.
I agree, because when I look at companies that do their own, and they're massive, and they're the kind of the ones who've been they have been focusing on these kind of metrics and concepts. Like let's throw some big names. Netflix, who actually has been sort of one of the key companies behind the whole Simian Army.
Yep.
Uber, I've noticed too, another big company, but they have thousands upon thousands of microservices. And so of course they have to actually do sampling, if I remember one of the blogs correctly. But they write their own stuff because some of the tools they're using today just don't cut it. Right? Like if you're feeding billions upon billions of metrics a minute to Prometheus, right, just for your infrastructure, how well is that handling it? I don't think it's and how do you parse that data? How do you extrapolate the information you want out of that? How do you get to that like observable service that you want to get to?
Even when I look back at some of the scale of some of the services that we've managed in the past, where we have had 8,000-10,000 servers that we manage, like physical servers. We still weren't at the point where we were generating enough data that we needed to write custom tooling. We were still able to use standard open source tooling to do what we needed to get done.
Yeah, and it's a good point, because we did have, I know what you're referring to, and there was some custom tooling in there, but it wasn't good.
No, well, this is also pre-observability. Like this was when Monitoring Sucks was starting up.
Yeah,
so it was.
Oh, I agree, but I think also part of the problem is that we didn't understand like just how to do proper monitoring. So there's these like and we were also using a crap ton of bad tools too. I mean, they just weren't fitting the job. It was more because somebody had wanted to get the benefits of being a vendor Vendors.
They-
I'm not going to say the word. So
That wasn't that the guy where someone asked you what his job was because they thought he was a professional buyer? Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, that was interesting. Anyway, rather than spending the whole time reminiscing, let's kick things off. And how much roughly are we spending on Datadog a year right now?
Right now we're looking at, I think this last year has been about 200,000. Looking at the quote for the following year, because they're going to do seasonal, it'll go down to about 160, 170,000.
Go down by or go down to?
Go down 2. So we'll save about 30,000.
And that's just the bill, right? That's not overages.
Yeah, well, the idea behind the seasonal bill is that it'll take in consideration our peak points. So overages should be very nominal in comparison to what we're seeing right now. Like, for example, last month's overages bill was 16,000.
Yeah, that was hefty.
That is hefty. And so, you look at the bill, you can see exactly where we need to start focusing. And the 2 areas we need to focus are on traces and logs. We're getting, and it's not even ingestion, it's retention. Now, I have a problem with the way Datadog does the billing, but I would love to say we need to not retain as much, but I don't think we should shoot ourselves in the foot if that information is important to us. If we're deriving or getting observable behavior out of that, I'm doing air quotes on observable, but I think that's because
I'm staring off into the space of the lake, so.
Oh, you're already lost. I've lost Damian, folks. We're gone. So, well, anyway, thanks for tuning in.
It's been a good chat.
Yeah, we'll see you next time. We may be back somewhere else. Who knows where we'll be. We've decided we're going to travel and just do this remote work thing and give it a real test.
Yeah, digital nomads. So here's a problem that I've always had with specifically Datadog's pricing model, and admittedly they're an easy target here, but they're by no means the only company that does this, where we now have effectively a mild conflict of interest. We want to minimize the amount of data we send to Datadog because it's really expensive. And this is where Datadog stands out in amongst the crew that do this, is they are just absurdly expensive. But if we minimize the amount of data we send to them, we hurt our ability to understand our systems.
Exactly.
And so we have this constant debate and pull and tug. I don't know the word that I'm trying to use here, where we want to send them more data, but we don't want to send them more data, and it's frustrating. It takes a lot of energy to figure out what is the exact right set of data that they need to get.
Yeah, you're kind of caught between an older term would be like caught between a rock and a hard place with them, really, because you don't know exactly. So, and that's the thing. Like, I've been looking at some of the information we're sending to Datadog, and yes, we can clean up a lot of it because there are things from development that are classified in the same way as production, and really we don't need that information going into Datadog because it's not partially because of the price tag of it. And how often, like, it's good to test out, make sure your monitoring tools are working, the agent's working properly, you're getting the information or not, or if you're doing if you've got a new application, you're checking the tracing, make sure the library is collecting that information as well, and it all makes sense, which I don't think developers do, but I'm not gonna say yay or nay because I haven't really talked to them. I don't know for sure. So, but the thing is that you really don't need all that information for development. And when you think about it, those metrics from development, whether they be traces, logs, metrics, whatever, the information, it's really not life-threatening, or I shouldn't say life-threatening. It's really not customer impacting immediately. Down the road, yeah, if you're introducing bugs and you see things in there, you should be able to figure that out. But I mean, does anybody really use Datadog when they are in development for that information? And so,
I know some people do.
Yeah, some do.
I've talked to a couple of developers internally who definitely do look at it, and they struggle when Datadog isn't set up properly, and they struggle with how to work with Datadog in a local development environment, because our local development environment is sometimes you're in remote Docker, sometimes you're in local Docker, and it gets a little bit awkward at times. But I don't know how widely used it is. This is what you were saying before.
Just in case this.
Screen timeouts are a thing. You need the mouse wiggler.
I do.
The thing that just like constantly software moves your mouse.
Anyway, that's just.
That might be a cut, but.
Yeah.
All right, so if Datadog is a problem, and you know, we're jumping to conclusions right now by saying it is a problem because all we really talked about is cost. But let's say we decide that Datadog's a problem.
Well, okay. Let's not mince words though. Cost is a huge thing when you talk about like I've had this song and dance for God knows how long. This is why things like Nagios and Cacti and OpenNMS, when I first started, were a lot more popular than buying something. Like, look at it. Okay, let's going back to a place we both used to work at when we first met.
Research in Motion.
Exactly. But what do they use? They use Big Brother, and they use a lot of internal tooling for the monitoring. And a lot of people liked using that because it was easier. It was less. It was more cost effective.
It's funny that we had this massive corporate license for EMC Smarts and a whole bunch of different plugins, and yet the heart of our monitoring was still Big Brother and custom checks. And even when we went off and started doing our own thing on the special projects, we didn't use Smarts.
No.
We used Zabbix.
We tried Xenos, and then we moved off into Nagios.
Yep.
Or we moved back to Nagios because we weren't.
We did try OpenNMS for a while, and it was just too big. And it was Xenos that we wound up rolling with, and then Nagios.
But it's still, and that's the thing. Like, I mean, that's interesting. What do you see?
A heron.
Really?
It's gone now. It was just like skimming across the water.
Oh, see, I should have left the door open.
I don't get cold in here.
That's true. We gotta keep it nice and warm. But it's interesting because over the years, so if you think about it, when you want to do proper monitoring, let's ignore the whole observability piece for a minute, because that's just not just monitoring. That's a whole whack of other stuff. And I'll be honest, the last few places I've been at, we're nowhere near doing observability.
Observability is hard to do. Yes,
it is hard to do, and we're not doing it. And I wish we got to not confuse monitoring, basic core monitoring, with observability, because we're not doing observability. We're barely doing monitoring right now. We're not getting those like point in time, binary, true or false kind of like results. Like, hey, your service is up, your service is down, your service is having a problem, your service is not having a problem.
We talk a lot privately about problems with observability articles, like the N pillars of observability.
Yeah.
And I think one of the side effects of those articles and of that mindset and of the vendor approach of we will shrink wrap, package, and sell you observability is, as technologists, we wind up looking at things and saying, I'm doing tracing, ergo I have observability.
Exactly.
And that's not true. Like,
exactly.
Yes, you're generating traces, and yes, that's immensely valuable and crucially important. But it's not enough to actually have an observable system. And that's what it means to be doing observability, is to have a system that is observable. And that is hard.
Exactly. And so, we went off to the side there. I think
I'm slowly trying to work us back to be talking about what does it mean, and this is where you were going, what does it mean to do monitoring? What are the components of a monitoring system? What do you have to be running? What do you have to set up? How does it work?
Well, when you want to do that, people talk about the 3 pillars of observability, but let's ignore that for a minute. But you do need those 3 pieces. So you need logs. You need your traces now, which is something that's still relatively new. Let's be honest. Like, a lot of people have tried it. It's getting out there. It's getting more and more common. But it's still rather newish, because it's still not. People haven't perfected or understood really what you can get out of it. And then you have metrics, and people, so metrics are the things everything else. That's what we used to collect only. I remember we barely used anything for logs back in the day because it all came from the sort of use method of like utilization, saturation, and errors, and you pull from infrastructure. So your CPU memory, disk usage, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But these were physical things because we were in physical environments, and so it was easy. And so you could understand how your application was running because it caused a CPU to spike, or it caused a memory to spike, or it started using up more disk space than it should have because you're monitoring for that.
One of the objectives of observability is to remove the need for the technologist to have a contextual understanding of what the system is doing. And that's like metrics. We're all like, you roughly understand the state of the underlying systems, and from that you can infer what the problem is. And observability is like, it's intended to remove that need to infer, because it actually says this is the state of your system.
And if you're having a problem, you should start looking here. It's far more specific and detailed in what your approach.
It's interesting when you were just talking about logs, it's interesting to think of the problem that we had ages ago when we were working with large systems is that we generated more logs per hour than our tools could search per hour.
Oh yeah.
And so logs were basically useless to us. And we are not at that scale right now. Like, we're not generating that volume of logs right now. But if we continue to grow without curtailing our log generation, we will be in that problem, in 10, 15 years. And it's interesting that that core problem with logs, which is what do you log, remains. Like, it's not a solved problem. It's not a thing that we know. And it's not a thing that you can shrink wrap and say, here, install this library, and bam, your logging is solved. Like, you actually need to know, in these cases you log, in these cases you don't.
Well, that's the same with traces, though. And I feel like we haven't really learned enough with logs to actually apply any of those those lessons learned from logging to traces, because what do you trace? I mean, yeah, you get some stuff, but it's like a stack trace. You still need to interpret what that stack traces mean. If you don't have enough context on that stack trace, there's no point. Like, if your stack trace says, I got an error, great.
Sweet.
Lovely. But I mean, that's what people put in their logs, though. Error.
Or they put progress bars in their logs.
Or progress.
Installing package foo, 1%, 2%, 3%.
With the actual progress bar,
Yes.
like growing
Yes.
100% done.
Excellent. That only took, 700 log lines.
Yeah. Great.
Anyway,
and what exactly was done?
We derailed ourselves again.
Yeah.
Components of a monitoring system. So if we wanted to move away from Datadog and we didn't have another vendor to move to, what does that mean? What do we have to do? What do we have to run?
Well,
we do that ourselves. And is it actually more cost effective to do it ourselves?
Interesting question, because there is no right answer to that. So I did manage to catch a couple of the talks. I haven't watched them all, but from Monorama this year at 2022 in Portland, the keynote address was about buy versus build. Now, there is no right answer to that, because sometimes buying is better, sometimes building is better. It really is about the use case. It's really about, you really need to take a true look at what you're working on and get away from the whole, I'd rather buy it, or you just don't be so rigid in your approach. Sometimes it makes more sense to go one way. Sometimes it makes more sense to go another way. Sometimes it makes sense to just do a little bit of this, a little bit of that. Now, in our situation, we've got another problem that we're dealing with, and that's state ramp. So as far as we know, communication has been, if a vendor is not state ramp authorized or FedRAMP authorized, it is not viable to use, especially for some of the things, especially when it comes to monitoring observability, because we rely on monitoring to tell us of the health of our system. And if that system is down.
So this goes back to something that you and I talked, it was one of our first really at-length conversations around monitoring observability. And I don't want to derail the conversation right now, but it is important within the context of state ramp is you have an organization that is established, and they have a formalized incident response process, and they have incident severities and SLOs and all that stuff, and they're doing all that right. What do they do if their monitoring system is unavailable? how do you treat that situation?
Mm.
And the conclusion we came to at the time was you have to assume that you are hard down
Uh-huh.
because you can't prove otherwise.
Uh-huh.
And until you can bring your monitoring systems back online, it is a all hands on deck situation because you need people to manually check the state of your services to make sure they're working properly while you have people also restoring your monitoring and now observability systems. And that, if you take that approach, that mindset, and adopt it in StateRAMP, by definition, that means that our monitoring tools are a core part of our information systems. That's our current reading of things. That may change.
Hopefully.
Will, but we're still trying to work our way through that.
Let me pause.
My throat has cleared now, so I can talk properly again. You can hear the ATV in the background.
Wow.
How
We're
long
like
has it
just 20 minutes of chit chat so far. Not bad, eh?
Yeah, I feel like we've actually churned through some pretty good topics in a fairly short period of time.
Okay, so back.
And we're back.
Oh, thank you for that commercial break. Oh, wow.
Today's episode brought to you by ExpressVPN.
Oh, that ExpressVPN. Oh, we should make up a fake one. Waddling.
No.
And this is when the conversation gets totally derailed.
Okay, so StateRAMP,
Yeah.
observable systems, they're in context for our definition of information systems.
So therefore, if you're on your systems are down, then you can assume you're hard down because otherwise you just don't have the idea. You just can't prove otherwise. So that said, you're asking about the components. So if we're going to do it ourselves, so again, going back to the buy versus build thing, we don't, there is arguments for both things. If we do a build our own, it is feasible, but you got to make sure you have the right talent. And like you have to have in-house people who can actually keep it up. The other thing I find, and the biggest problem I ever found with build your own, like everything, because it doesn't get introduced properly into the ecosystem of infrastructure as code. So you need to have components in there to ensure that things get updated as they become available, and make sure that is part of the priority. Monitoring has always been a second priority in every flipping project from the beginning. Since it was first thought of, we need to have this kind of information. So, and this initiative, like being observability or monitoring of initiatives within the organizations, have always been, yeah, we want to do that. Oh, but wait, we should do this instead. And then the priority always gets shifted off.
This is something that I really like about observability as a concept, because monitoring historically has been a service that is provided, whereas observability, like security, like performance, it is an attribute, an aspect of your services. So it is not a thing, like you cannot add observability in, you cannot add security in, you cannot add performance in. They're all attributes of how your services perform and behave. And I really like how the wording around observability requires that we change our perspective on what it means to have observable systems versus what it means to have monitored systems. Because monitored systems, that is a verb that is taken against your systems. Observable systems is, I'm just repeating myself now.
A characteristic.
Thank you. Characteristic is the word I was looking for. Get out of my head.
I can't help it. We're the one and the same.
All right, so let's assume that we at least want to explore a build your own system. Let's ignore how we got into that. Let's just leave bought systems to the side. Right away, I would start by saying your observability systems, like your core platform, your analysis services, your data retention services, they can't be in the same environment as your production systems. They need to be isolated. So you're talking about a different AWS account, possibly even a different cloud provider, depending on risks identified around.
So having done this once before, we went a separate AWS account with VPC peering, and this was all done in AWS, of course, but so with VPC peering, all access also went through that account too. So if you want to access production, you went through this other account to gain access. That way, because so I'll run it real quickly. We had our VPN hosts in there. So we had 2 VMs using Palo Alto VMs. They acted as our VPN access, so wherever we were, we would connect to those, and then we can go from there into production, development, whatever. But it all go through there because of everything was sort of networked through that one account. So we could have an audit trail, who's coming in from where. It went through one system, so it was very clear. There was no secret, like, the only thing that was exposed to the interwebs was web services and things like that for the customers only. None of this.
Yep.
So no public IPs. Everything was done through one thing. All the logging, all the monitoring, everything was done for that. I think the Jenkins I forget how Jenkins was set up, but we did the self-hosted or self-managed with Jenkins as well, and a couple other tools. But so I like having that. Personally, I think that's good because it keeps things, you keep it very separate. So if one account, for whatever reason, gets
has problems,
whether it be security or otherwise, you can kind of have that layer of sort of it's separated. You may want to go in a different region. Sometimes that makes a little bit of sense. Yeah, so there's a few sort of added bonuses of having a different account, and then obviously we didn't use any of the CloudWatch is great, but it's not. It's good because it does have some core things in there. You kind of know what you're looking at, but it really is missing a lot of good stuff. And the way to get around it is very difficult. It's not very intuitive. And hence, that's why I think, that's why you see within AWS a managed Prometheus, managed Grafana, managed Elastic, because they just do it better.
I find most of the cloud providers' native logging tools, they're fine to use as log aggregators and routers, but their log analysis capabilities are just severely lacking.
I hate to say this, but I think GCP with its logging was a hair bit better than CloudWatch.
GCP, to their credit, didn't pretend that they were good analysis tools.
No.
It's actually called the Logs Explorer.
Yeah.
And it was perfectly adequate as a Logs Explorer. I had no problems with okay, I can look for this string and find it.
It was a little bit more intuitive than you can kind of get through a little bit easier. And go, okay, I got it. So it's not that, I don't think it's a good tool. Now, and that's my biggest problem. As far as everything else is concerned, when it comes to doing, I would think, Jaeger proves to be the sort of leading open source standard when it comes to open telemetry and tracing. If I was going to go open, if I was going to do self-hosted, I would say, let's explore that first as a tool
For the folks at home, Dan has just jumped topics to be about 4 steps ahead of where we were.
What, you're surprised by this?
No, I'm not, but we went from talking about the problems with cloud logging tools
to Jaeger,
Jaeger, without any segue, not even mentioning traces.
No, well, why would I?
All right, so
that's how my brain works.
So we have a dedicated. Let's keep it simple. We have a dedicated AWS account so it's a separate VPC. We use VPC peering to connect to our production accounts. Do we have the same VPC also connect to our development/staging areas, or do we have a whole separate environment to ingest staging?
Honestly, I think I would say maybe have them connected to the same ones, but ideally we use different instances for the actual, I don't know. That's a good question, because you run the risk when you're in development of things going a little bit sideways. You say, for example, you set up your logging, but you put it in debug mode, and then all of a sudden your logging system aggregator is ingesting billions upon billions of log entries versus what it was used to. So that could actually bring your production visibility right down to a halt because you weren't prepared for that kind of thing. And that's a true use case that's happened to me before.
There is a second concern with putting them in the same system, and this is something that has always bothered me about Datadog is their approach, which makes a lot of sense on the surface, is everything comes into the same system and you tag it, and that's fine. But when you're in the heat of an incident and you're struggling to understand what's going on, you're not always going to remember to add your environment production tag. There's going to be some query where that gets dropped, and you're going to look at these graphs, and you're going to go, what is going on? I do not understand. And you'll spend 20 minutes diagnosing a non-existent problem because you've also been looking at staging data. And maybe someone ran a load test over that time period, or maybe there was no traffic at all, so your averages are way down, or maybe, and like, I'm a huge believer in you keep your production and your staging
separate,
observability data separate. And you wind up with like foo.prod.tophatmonocle.com and foo.dev. Like, it's the same URL structure, but it's very clearly in the URL. This is development, this is production.
And that bodes well for even like security concerns too, right? Because if you want to keep your production really super tight, you can do that because it will be in a separate account, separate systems, all dealing with that. And so you can restrict access if need be. You can keep it all separate. And there's no production facing incidents from bad data coming from a development environment, which could bring all that or make a mix of things, or destroy, it can change things dramatically. I mean, think about it. Why would you have, this is why we have a production account and a development account in the cloud.
To keep them separate.
To keep them separate, right? Although some people don't follow that too strictly.
Smaller organizations, it's a lot easier to just put the resource where it solves your problem. And that just creates future tech debt.
Yeah.
That needs to be cleaned up at some point.
I feel like I should change that, but yeah. So I jumped ahead, didn't I? So
we kind of went off on the side because we were talking about Jaeger. So it's probably worth going over, like, we have our AWS account. We have, let's only talk about prods. Let's leave all non-prod systems out of scope. You brought up Jaeger, so we've already made the assumption that is worth exploring a little bit about using Prometheus.
Yeah, Prometheus I think is a fantastic tool because it does fit in here, especially because we're using a lot of containers. The Node Explorer sidecar or cAdvisor sidecar, either one or both. I've been in places where we have used both, and they provide different elements. So it's cheap to do, so you're not really using up as much as you would say with a Datadog agent feeding data into, right? So so yeah, Prometheus I think is a very strong contender when it comes to infrastructure metrics. Very strong. Had we been in an environment where we were using more VMs, we'd have a different conversation. But
it's like Prometheus and Node Explorer works fairly well. So what is Prometheus exactly? Is it, because it's not the time series database, it's more of a collector aggregator?
Well, yeah, it's a time series database that
yeah, it should say it's not just the time series.
Yeah, it's not just, because you have the ability to, because the way it collects the data, and it's not just limited to infrastructure metrics, you can't pull it in from some applications, like there's a MySQL exporter, and there's a whole slew of other ones. And you can feed all these metrics in there, so you can kind of get that correlation of data, and you can do queries. I think part of it is the query language. That is
PromQL.
The PromQL that can actually gather that stuff. And if you look at how, for the viewers at home, Datadog has a kind of a sort of like, you can do queries in it, but it's a bit of a drop down. There are a lot of things you can do with Prometheus that can pull like different methods, of way of extrapolating that data and looking at it in different ways, just on the query language, and then visualize it very quickly. And it's one of the strengths of it. The other part is the high cardinality and how it's, now you've got to be careful. Cardinality can get a little bit carried away and it can't bring the system to a halt, but it can handle large swathes of data and deal with cardinality.
Well, that was one of the earliest problems that Honeycomb was trying to solve, is how do you maintain high cardinality over time?
Yeah.
And one of the things that Datadog does behind the scenes is, when enough time has passed, they'll start to like roll up metrics and compress them to help address this long-term storage problem. And Honeycomb said, no, like if you give us metrics every 5 seconds, like until you expire those metrics, they are stored as you created them.
And that was, I think if I remember correctly too, you can do, it works both ways in Prometheus.
Yes, you can do both ways. And we've had other time series databases come out to kind of help address this this cardinality problem, which sort of relegates Prometheus to just being like an aggregator router agent. It just kind of like it takes data from its collectors and then shunts it off to this external time series database for storage.
Yep.
And this is where my knowledge of Prometheus starts to fall apart because I'm not an advanced user.
Well, then what you do after over like period, like you would actually get a thing like Thanos, where for long-term storage. But and the beauty about Thanos is that so you can have like say you want a Prometheus, you have a Prometheus system in development, one in staging, one in production, and then that production is actually geo dispersed. So you've got one in U.S., one in Europe, and one in say Asia Pac. Those Thanos you can actually query the Thanos interface, and that'll pull from all those sources. So and you can limit it by the labels, like I just want this particular region. But if I want all prod from all 3 regions, I can query Thanos and it'll pull that because it'll pull all those things together and it maintains the long-term storage. So we're keeping our metrics for a year, boom, it gets stored in S3 buckets for a year and it gets expired. Which is kind of a slick kind of little operation. That's something that's been, I think it's about 3 or 4, I mean, last I used it was about 3 years ago, but 2 years, 3.
So even if we don't necessarily need the advanced functionality, data storage, whatever, like the back-end side of how we store stuff in the time series database, something like Thanos might make sense because it just gives us a bunch of tooling on top of the TSDB that gives us flexibility and room to grow. And
it's like because it's like it's when you look at Thanos, it's just more or less it is the same interface as Prometheus. It's just all of your Prometheus instances all in one, which is kind of handy. And so all your time series databases are all there.
And given that we're currently within the context of StateRAMP, we're talking about having at least a cold standby site, being able to have one instance that we're hitting for our observability tooling that knows like where you are and where that would be. Okay.
Yeah, you mean like you just kind of, when we roll that cold site out, we also roll out all of our monitoring that will pull that information in. And so as soon as it goes live, it feeds it in, and you don't have to change anything with monitoring. You still query that Thanos interface because it'll still keep pulling that information. So it's very seamless. Yeah. That's it. It's a pretty I mean, like it's lightweight. It's fun. It's powerful. I love it.
All right. So to kind of fast forward the conversation a bit, because we're starting to drag on a little bit. If we're talking about build your own, Prometheus is the starting point. Like you don't really consider another platform right now. Prometheus is kind of the gold standard of this is how you do monitoring and observability if you're going to build it yourself.
Yeah, it'd be the first place I would go with.
And then it's a matter of figuring out what is the right design and architecture for how to get Prometheus rolled out for your environment. Yeah. And now we're starting to talk about like you have Jaeger for traces, you have Loki for logs, you have, I don't even know what the other subsystems are.
Well, don't forget Grafana.
In my head, I assume if you're rolling out Prometheus, you're rolling out Grafana. Like Grafana is just such a nice tool to work with.
And it's excellent because of the way it's been set up. It has because you can use so many different data sources to feed information. So it has support for Sentry, it has support for CloudWatch, it has support for Elasticsearch, it has support for Prometheus. The list goes on. And these are just in the open source plugins, right? You don't even have to go and buy an enterprise license. It's when you get into Datadog and Honeycomb and some of these other ones you need to. I think Splunk too. So really the only thing that's kind of left open is sort of is the unknown for me is what do we do for a logging aggregator? Like a truly good, strong I don't find Loki to be, and for those who are not familiar with it, Loki is the logging aggregator interface that Grafana has proposed to use, but I find it too simplistic.
Loki feels like we are trying to fit a problem into a solution rather than trying to figure out how to solve the problem properly. Yeah. And this is where, like, as much as I like Grafana, Elk is a very good log management tool. Loki feels like you're trying to not have an Elk stack and you want to have everything in your Prometheus stack. Yeah. And it feels just a little bit like it's fine. Like, I ran it at home for a while. It was perfectly adequate for my needs. It was actually quite nice to work with. Because I don't want to roll out a full Elk cluster in my basement. But if we're talking about, we have what, 15-ish services, we're generating how many terabytes of logs a day?
I think we're doing about 10 to 15 terabytes a month.
A month? Okay, so that's less than, that's good. That's actually lower than I thought it was, which is excellent.
That's kind of averaging over the course of the year.
But now you're talking about your Prometheus database being, you're adding at least 10 terabytes a month. Yeah. That's going to get really big. It's going to get really slow. Just like don't put it in there. Put it in Elk. Give yourself the ideal tools. There's a huge open source community around Kibana and standard dashboards and dashboard templates.
Yeah. No, it's I think Elastic would be definitely a possible way to go. The only caveat with Elastic you got to be so ever careful with is when they come up with new versions. And so when you do a major version upgrade, there's invariably always breaking changes. And it's never as easy as just like, okay, so example, doing a Grafana upgrade, swapped out the binary. I think I have done it so many times now that I've rarely seen any breaking changes cause any real problems. So boom, swap it out. It's a simple binary swap out and you push out the container, you're good to go. Elastic, a little bit more involved because you've got, because also too, you have data you're dealing with. And that's part of the problem is you've got indexes all across multiple systems and they all have to be brought up to whatever changes are occurring. So you could experience possible downtime during an upgrade. I have had to do that a couple of times. And you cannot fall behind because that creates such severe bad tech debt and stress that you don't want to deal with that. So
it's basically like having to manage a whole separate database cluster.
Yeah.
Effectively.
Yeah. And given the experience, like what we've gone through with this MySQL upgrades recently.
So this goes back to that whole build versus buy.
Yes.
Is, the moment you throw an Elk cluster in there, even though Elk does make a lot of sense for log management, your management costs have just gone way up. Yeah. And suddenly, like, you're now talking about managing a Prometheus cluster, which like literally one person can do. That's fine. So you have a team of 5 people, they're going to have no problem absorbing the cost of managing that Prometheus cluster. You throw Elk in there, you're going to need and want people paying attention to that full time.
Yeah.
And so you've just incurred some, and now suddenly that $200,000 a year on Datadog, where you're like, sweet, we can hire a person and run infrastructure and still save money. Now you're like, well, but we're throwing Elk in there, maybe. And this is where the benefit of the buy really comes in, is you can just throw your logs at Honeycomb and say, thank you very much.
So we're going to wrap this up. We got cut off a little bit there, but...
Security.
But yeah, I mean, we can actually, I feel like this is something we can just keep going on and on about. Well, because we're both passionate about it, but
I'm almost wondering if we just like pause the conversation here and pick it up in a couple of weeks and just keep on talking about this for a few weeks, because we've laid kind of the foundation of an observability platform, but there's a lot of stuff to add in.
There is, and I think too that it'd be worth saying, okay, we'd like to get feedback from people who watch and say, yeah, I have thoughts about that too. What are your thoughts? Tell us about it, because I mean, I've been waxing philosophical about observability for a decade, if not more.
I brought a microfiber cloth up.
Oh, I got one too. I just don't know. I'm just late. I got one right here. But
wobbly canoes, man. Wobbly canoes.
Yes, wobbly canoes. But yeah, I would like to hear thoughts on this because, I mean, just because I've been doing it for a while doesn't mean I know everything. And same goes for you. Like, I mean, I'd love to hear what other thoughts are. How do we approach this? I mean, okay, so what are our goals is to be fiscally responsible, ensure that our observability objectives are maintained.
Identified first.
Or
and
identified,
maintained.
yeah. We should identify them and then have a plan to make sure that we're able to do that. And there was one other thing I want to throw in there.
Was it about SLOs? Because I know you love SLOs.
Yeah, but we're not even close to that yet. I'm sorry, like we're not anywhere near doing it. I would love to start doing SLOs because that would change the way we do monitoring. The way we do everything is because we know.
Let's talk about SLOs at a later date.
Yeah, because that's a whole other thing. And doing SLOs is really super important. Okay, on that note, we are probably going to start changing this to do every 2 or 3 weeks now because we feel like we're not, because we're coming up at the end of the year. We have State Ramp, which has also got a bit of a priority. We also, so we're probably not going to do this as often. And we are, as always, looking for guests.
Yes.
So please.
If you have thoughts about observability, about build it yourself, about tooling, let us know.
Yeah, build
whether
for
you want to
Spy.
like ask out of band and we'll talk about it, or whether you want to come on and just like chat about your thoughts and your approaches, we want to hear from you.
Or if you want to talk about other engineering topics, we're here to talk about that. Or if you want to ask us questions about us personally, because we're so fun to know about.
No, leave me out of that.
You want to know about Damian? I got this dirt on Damian. No, I don't. Okay, on that note, thank you. So long, farewell. Thanks for all the fish. Beep, 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 dee, 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 dee. Wait, what's that song from Community?
I don't know. You need to keep this in.
Still have to edit out the first 3 seconds, but that's easy enough.
I need to pee. No, keep it going.